Weather is one of the biggest factors affecting safety in general aviation. For most of us, meteorology was simply another exam that we passed when doing our PPL. Something we studied for really hard at the time and then gradually forgot parts of it once we started flying regularly. Recently, I attended the weather school with meteorologist Simon Keeling, and it generally changed how I think about weather when planning my flights. This video isn't going to replace the course, because that would be absolutely impossible for a short video like this, but I do want to give you some insight as to what you would learn, why I think it's valuable, and why I think many pilots would benefit from doing it. My name is Dale, and this is Left Seat Culture, a channel about flying gear, the culture of aviation. Most of what I cover is general aviation, but hopefully it's of interest to all pilots, whatever you fly. So many pilots will already know Simon Keeling from his aviation weather briefings online. He regularly produces the pilot weather briefings and aviation forecasts. Probably see them on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. And he's very well known in the UK flying community as well. What I can say after doing this course is that he is exactly the same person in real life, or at least on video, as he is in those briefings. Approachable, knowledgeable, and very good at explaining complex weather concepts in a way that pilots can actually use and understand. Now, in terms of how I did the course online, and it runs over 2 sessions. Each session is scheduled to last around 2.5 hours, although in my case, both of them ran closer to 3 hours. Mainly because Simon stayed on to answer questions and make sure everyone really understood the concepts. I did the course live via Zoom, but he also does it in person if that's of more interest to you. And one nice touch is that when you do the online version, you also have access to a recording of the session afterwards, which is really useful because there's quite a lot of information covered. When I did the course, it cost around £299. Obviously not a super trivial amount of money, but an absolute bargain in the aviation world. And I'll come back to whether I think it's worth that later on in the video. So one of the key points Simon makes during the course is that the PPL Meteorology often focuses on memorizing concepts rather than actually understanding how weather actually behaves. So we learn things kind of the types of fronts, cloud classifications, pressure systems. What we don't often learn particularly well is how those things interact to produce the weather we actually experience as pilots. And more importantly, how to look at weather charts and make a quick judgment about whether flying conditions are likely to be good or not. One of the biggest takeaways for me was the importance of air masses. During the PPL training, we learn different classifications: polar maritime, tropical maritime, polar continental, tropical continental. But the course really emphasises how air masses can be used to predict the flying conditions. Simon explains that much of his own aviation forecasting is based primarily on identifying the air masses affecting the area at any given time. Once you know the air masses, you can make a very good estimate of the cloud base, what your visibility is going to like, chances of turbulence, and any shower activity. And that is incredibly useful for us as pilots. So instead of relying entirely on forecasts, you start to understand why the weather is doing what it's doing. Another interesting section of the course was how to identify and understand fronts. When we learn meteorology initially, we're taught to recognise warm fronts and cold fronts and occluded fronts on the charts, but the course goes deeper into how meteorologists actually use fronts in terms of real data. For example, one thing Simon explains is that changes in dew point are often a better indicator of a front than temperature alone, because dew point is less affected by day-to-day temperature variation. Forecasters also look for things like wind direction changes, wind speed changes, pressure falling ahead of a front and what rises behind it, and the characteristics of the cloud sequences as well. Understanding those relationships helps you recognise when weather conditions may change more rapidly and obviously hopefully have a more safer flight. Another area that was explained really well is how wind behaves around pressure systems. When I did my PPL Meteorology, obviously we heard about things like the Coriolis effect, pressure gradients and friction, but what the course helps emphasise is that it's the combination of these forces together that actually determines the wind direction and the speed, no one force on its own. So once you can understand that interaction properly, surface wind starts to make much more sense when you're looking at the charts. There was also some really practical discussion about gusty conditions, which obviously matters quite a lot for pilots. For example, certain air masses, particularly polar maritime and returning polar maritime, tend to produce gusty conditions. And you're also more likely to encounter gusts behind cold fronts, downwind of high terrain, and where the isobars run very straight across a region. Those kinds of practical insights are exactly the sort of thing that helps when deciding whether weather conditions are comfortable or not for flying. Another major part of the course is learning how to properly read the synoptic charts. The goal isn't to turn pilots into meteorologists on the course. Instead, the aim is to help pilots look at charts and quickly understand a few things. One, what is the large-scale weather pattern, what air masses are involved, and how the weather may evolve over the next day or two. Simon explains that it's this kind of understanding that builds confidence in your ability to predict weather yourself, rather than relying entirely on forecasts. And that's particularly useful when forecasts don't quite cover the exact time or location that you're interested in. One thing I found particularly interesting was the discussion around how forecasts evolve over time. When you're planning a flight several days in advance, the forecast may change significantly. But as events get closer, forecasters gradually build confidence in their prediction, and understanding that process helps pilots interpret forecasts more realistically. Instead of expecting a perfect accuracy several days ahead, you can learn to understand how confidence improves as the forecast horizon shortens. One thing I didn't expect from the course was that it's also quite a good opportunity to connect with other pilots. The session included plenty of opportunities for questions and discussion, and afterwards there's also an online community where people who have attended the weather school can continue discussing weather topics. So it's not just a one-off course, it's also a bit of a learning community. So the obvious question is it worth the cost? At around £299, it's not cheap, but you could argue cheap in terms of aviation terms. But personally, I think any course that helps you make even better weather decisions as a pilot is probably money well spent. Weather is one of the biggest factors affecting general aviation safety, and improving your understanding of it can only be a good thing. So it's a big double thumbs up from me on the course. There's also some follow-on courses available. There's Weather School Part 2, and there's also a course specifically focused on skew-T diagrams. Both of those courses go into even more depth, and they're definitely things that I'm looking to do in the future. So overall, I found the Weather School generally really valuable. It takes the meteorology most of us learn during our training and turns it into something far more practical for real flying. And perhaps more importantly, it helps you build confidence to interpret weather information yourself rather than just relying on the forecasts. So, a question to you, have you ever done an aviation weather course like this? Or are there any other weather topics you'd like to understand better as a pilot? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I'd be really interested to hear. If you found this video useful, give it a like and subscribe to Left Seat Culture for more GA insights, flying tips and trips. And if you want to carry on the conversation, consider joining the Left Seat Culture Discord. There is a link down in the description, and I will see you there.